feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, feeling a little gray on this Thursday evening. We're a little late. The embargo already broke on this one.
We're not late. We're still early. It's playing at Landmark Cinemas in Whitby and in right now, I think.
Yes,
as we're recording this.
Yes, hence
A
why my
Netflix
review
movie
got out today instead of tomorrow.
in Durham. Gray is the perfect word for this movie. Today we are reviewing the Russo brothers, The Greymen, starring Ryan Gosling, Chris Evans, Ana de Armas, Jessica Henwick, Regé-Jean Page.
Regé-Jean Page.
Regé?
Yeah.
Okay. I was there, almost there, Eric. Almost there.
It's okay. It took me a couple of times because I had to do the voiceover for my review, and usually I repeat it over 100 times. So
yeah. Julia Butters, Dhanush, Alfre, Woodard, Billy Bob Thornton, and more. Eric, how are you on this gray Thursday?
We're talking about the Gray Man on a Thursday evening. How do you think I am?
We're both wearing gray. We're both wearing gray.
It's nice
for the occasion
to always talk to you and have the movie conversation, even though we had it like right after the movie ended and we were both in agreement and what have you. But when you're completely uninspired by what you have seen, especially, we've talked about this many times on the regular show and in reviews, the hardest movies to dissect or really have an engaging conversation about are the ones that are middle of the road.
Yeah.
And this is the definition of a middle of the road movie, but with a $220 million price tag, which, where did the money go? I don't understand.
There's one sequence that is one of the ugliest looking things I've ever seen in my life. So the $200 million definitely didn't go there.
No.
I mean, with some of the articles that are dropping with how some of these special effects houses are being treated, maybe I don't know where the fuck the money goes. It's definitely not to the people working on them. But yeah, you put it perfectly. I use the term painfully mediocre. It's just one of those movies that it's a Netflix movie through and through, man. Like it's Red Notice. It's the, what's the Charlize Theron one?
The Old Guard.
At least those two movies felt like they had a little bit more of a personality to them, even though they were both, I felt like, pretty middle of the road fare too. This just feels like every dad spy novel, every dad spy movie, every trope from those movies kind of thrown into one very generic, over 2 hour, mildly entertaining but not really entertaining because it's just a bunch of shit you've seen in a million other movies before. I can't even say slickly made because I'm starting to think the Russo brothers, it's not that I thought much of them, but they directed two of the biggest movies of all time. They performed, two of my favorite MCU movies because I felt like they did stick the landing when it came to both Infinity War and Endgame, and they did pretty well with the Captain America movies that they did as well.
Don't forget Community and Arrested Development.
No, and I mean, I love both of those shows. I love the episodes that they did, but I'm starting to think now with Cherry and this, I don't know, maybe that was more Marvel than Russo's, and I wouldn't be surprised if they end up going back to Marvel after this because, again, I was chatting with some people on Twitter once the embargo broke too, and I'm like, this movie will probably do gangbusters for Netflix when you come to what their metrics are, which is going to be people hitting play on the movie. So you have big names. You have Chris Evans as a not a literal mustache twirling villain.
He is a little
pretty close.
He is.
He is, but he doesn't twirl his literal. He literally.
No, he's got a
hipster
stash.
But,
Lloyd Hansen
and Gosling, doing his thing, but on a $200 million budget. And Ana de Armas doing a lesser version of the character she played in Bond. And, it's, I don't even know, man. You're going to get people to click on this thing. People are going to watch it. It's one of those movies that yeah, if you didn't invest much and you just threw it on Netflix, will most people give it a soft pass? I think probably, but this is a movie that, you know, they want a franchise, which they've been trying to do forever with everything that they put out. They're trying to, you know, be taken seriously in the blockbuster space, Netflix. And I just feel like time and time again, they're just putting out this stuff that looks ugly, isn't doing anything overly original or creative. It's just playing everything so safe and relying on star power and the names of the directors and the movies that they did before. So, which are just, you know, like I mentioned, the biggest movies on the planet. But I'm starting to think that that's not so much them, even though this is also written by the guys who did all their Marvel stuff too. But yeah, just painfully mediocre. I just sat there kind of stone faced the whole movie and
As
just
stone face as Ryan Gosling is through the whole film.
yeah, and we were joking about like, yeah, his shtick of the quiet kind of guy works in something like Drive, but when you throw it in something like this, I like Gosling, I like Chris Evans, I like Ana de Armas, I'm like, I like Billy Bob Thornton. It's just
But do
like,
you like him de-aged and with dyed
oh
hair in a
yeah,
prologue?
I all those things seem like it should work, and you're getting similar action that you got in the Captain America movies, except I feel like it just doesn't work as well when you're not playing with that sandbox and those toys in the Marvel universe, and it ends up just becoming like
Twice as many
um
title cards.
oh yeah, their one auteur stamp is a literal giant stamp of where people are, because that's like the ongoing thing. Like Civil War had that, you know, Avengers had that, Cherry had that, this now has that. So it did become comical the amount of globe trotting that is in this movie, where you get giant font that tells people where they are. So that was funny, but other than that, like, you know, the comedy doesn't really work. The action, like I said, it looks kind of like the Captain America stuff, but isn't as interesting because you're not playing in that kind of sci-fi space. You know, you have solid performances with what they're given from everyone. Like Chris Evans is having fun, but like, I don't think he's a particularly memorable villain, even though he's this, you know, sociopath, psychopath kind of guy. And Gosling, I like him as a leading man. I really, really do. I just feel like it's just so paint by numbers, so kind of gray and bland is the perfect word, that it just ends up being like, okay, I guess people will throw this on a Friday night or Saturday afternoon on Netflix, and it'll get millions and millions of views, and Netflix will go, it's our most watched movie ever, and you'll go, great. Okay. And then it'll get a sequel probably because of that. I don't know.
Yep.
It's not good. It's very fine.
It should have been called The Mediocre Man. Yeah, it's one of those movies where it's just riddled with the sort of spy espionage thriller cliches. You know, like this is basically this year's Without Remorse, except without a revenge sort of plot. And Mark Rainey, who wrote this, and this is a first in a series of novels, also co-wrote or was co-authored alongside Tom Clancy on a number of his later novels. So you can understand where this kind of like cottage industry of spycraft storytelling is coming from, to the point where you also begin to question certain aspects. So you have Gosling playing a sort of morally ambiguous CIA operative who kind of works off the books and comes in and does the jobs that the agency can't do themselves because they're tied to diplomatic sort of and government sort of guidelines. And the whole thing about that even is strange, because in the sequence that kind of kicks things off after this ridiculous prologue in 2003 in a Florida prison, where you see, as the already mentioned, de-aged Billy Bob Thornton kind of recruiting Gosling's character.
How did they make Gosling look older? Put a goatee on him, baby.
Yeah, and dye his hair like platinum blonde as he was in the Places Beyond the Pine.
And he was probably working on Barbie at
yeah, well, and it's also just interesting because, like, so
which was after, I know.
His character's name is Court Gentry, and then Billy Bob Thornton's character's name is Sir Donald Fitzpatrick. both are very British names. The characters are British, but for the purposes of hiring these actors, they didn't change anything other than they just said, okay, you know what, you're going to be North American actors, but we'll keep the names, but you don't worry about accents or anything like that.
Wait, we're in the movie
they're American. They're North American.
Okay.
But in the books,
they are,
and
they didn't change the name.
no, because Billy Bob Thornton is not a Sir in this, like Sir Donald Fitzpatrick, or Fitz as he's called. Fitzroy. Pardon me, Fitzroy. And with that, like, you're kind of like, okay, these names are ridiculous for these actors because they do not have any.
You know what? Couldn't have even told you what their names were.
Well, I just did. But Gosling has 3 names. So Gosling's character is Court Gentry.
I knew Sierra 6.
Sierra 6, and then the Gray Man. And so when you have this kind of opening prologue that establishes it, which is all exposition and just basically setting up this guy is kind of, an anti-hero type. Who has a sort of checkered background in what he's done and what have you, and then
it's a lot of telling, not showing. There
exactly
is some flashbacks,
but... and it's poorly lit, like the overexposure to kind of hide some of the digital seams of Thornton's de-aging is just, it's really kind of just washed out, and the entire movie looks washed out for the most part. But once you get to Bangkok, 18 years later, there's a title card, and you have this kind of assassination attempt that's kind of botched because of this moral compass that Sierra 6 has. It makes you kind of question the people that are being recruited for this previous regime that Thornton's character was a part of, that's kind of been pushed out for Regé-Jean Page's character to kind of come in and take over, and him wanting to kind of basically start fresh with people like Chris Evans's kind of madman, mustache twirling freelancer type. And so when when Ryan Gosling's character makes the decision not to take a shot, there's a certain reason for that, and then it also kind of gets hammered home again later on in this weird digression where you get to learn more about Six's relationship with Fitz's niece, played by Julia Butters of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where it's like, oh, this guy who is being described as somebody that will kind of do the things that the government or this agency won't, also is more kind of sound as a person than these government agencies.
He has a soft spot for kids, kind of.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, well, you've established in that opening scene that's the whole point of someone like him being hired, is that he is a stone cold killer and will not hesitate to kill anyone.
And even the backstory that they give him, I'm like, that's the thing that makes you go, that guy will kill anyone and doesn't care about it.
Exactly.
And I'm like, that doesn't really track to me. Like, no. Just the reason that they give that is just like, okay, that seems more like of a passion protection thing rather than someone that will, like, he'll kill anyone with no remorse. It's like, yeah. I get, like, we don't want to go into too spoiler territory, but like, it didn't track for me of like, that's why this guy Billy Bob Thornton would have been like, gotta get that guy out of anyone. Like, he wouldn't have been on anyone's radar. And it's just like, oh, he was reading through files and he's like, that motherfucker, that's the guy I need. It's like, they didn't, anyways, there's a lot of problems.
No, and that's, I mean, like, you could say like, oh, well, that's just nitpicking, but there's a lot of that throughout, to the point where you get this story of this globe-trotting character who goes on the run and is double-crossed by multiple people who he trusts, and where does he go? And he has a target on his back everywhere, most of which takes place in Eastern Europe. Croatia gets a shout out twice.
Croatia does, yeah.
Pandering to Matt and Nevis specifically.
One part of that, they show that they're on like an island with a castle. And then another nitpicky thing that I had throughout the movie. Sorry to cut you off, Eric.
No, please go on.
How they jump around from location to location so quickly and easily. And like, some things just don't track time-wise for me. Where it's like, it would take them so long to get from X place to X place. And this is like on an island. I'm like, how are cars getting there? How are other things getting here? I'm like, it's just the way, how much globe trotting there is in this movie. I'm like, what is the timeline of this movie, of like how many days does this take place throughout, and like how do they get from this place to this place. And those seem like nitpicky things, but like also take you out of the movie when you have that many fucking gigantic title cards, and like, and then you have your characters jumping around that much. I'm like, the logic starts to break for me of going like, how they doing this? And I know that your like suspension of disbelief is like, oh, they're super spies, don't worry about it. If they need to get somewhere, they're getting there instantly, and you don't need to know how they did it. And I'm like, all
even
right,
they don't know
cool.
how they did it,
Yeah.
really. But I mean,
all right.
I think what actually kind of pairs very well with that criticism is also even just body types. I think that when you have a movie like this, and comic book films as well, and you have the hero taking off their shirt to show their rockin' bods, you question.
Gosling does look good though,
but that's the thing, how does this guy have that kind of body, given that he's always on the run, he's eating whatever he kind of can when he can. We see a scene where he's eating like a burger or something while he has his shoestring or his shoelaces tied to
but maybe not every mission's on like that.
But this mission specifically, though, you feel like, okay, there's been a lot of time that's passed, like he should kind of be almost frail and wiry in general.
But then that's what I mean by the time. It doesn't make sense to me of like how much time does this movie cover? Like it doesn't seem like it covers that much time. But then also I'm like, with some of the things that happen, I feel like it should.
Right.
And then that goes to your point.
But yeah, and that's a thing where like it kind of feels like, okay, well, this is a type of movie where that kind of logic and the imagery that you're showing, whether it be the physicality of the actors or how time is dispensed in something like this, kind of is like, okay, well, you have to put that aside and think, well, this is an action movie first and foremost. And if you're grading it on terms of being an action thriller spy movie, it fails because the action is almost completely null and void. There's no real interesting set piece, even though they destroy half of Prague in one sequence.
Yeah, I think that's the one people will maybe.
But it's only because it's very noisy, and there are a ton of drone camera sequences throughout, which Michael Bay did a lot with Ambulance as well earlier this year. And I mean,
it just doesn't fit. It's so awkward in the movie. Like it feels so weird.
And it's just the Russo brothers literally covering up the fact that they just don't really have any kind of clever ideas or have really thought anything through. It's just basically, okay, well, let's just add this to kind of distract for a couple of seconds while we kind of whiz and
or
go
they think
through
it's
things.
Adding style, but really it's just kind of distracting and weird.
Yeah.
And I feel like some of the points that you just brought up too, it's like, yeah, I think some of those things are easier to forgive in a Marvel movie. And I don't think Marvel should get a pass on everything, but I feel like when you try to ground a movie in reality, sort of like this movie tries to do, like it's not a sci-fi, it's just a classic spy movie, right? Like, yeah, there's some suspension of disbelief, like in a James Bond movie or
Mission
anything
Impossible.
like that, where Mission Impossible, that's also a thing. When you see things like Mission Impossible that does this kind of movie, and even Bond does this movie so well, like why are you even trying to do that? Like other people are already doing it so much better and are established that it's like, if you can't keep up with that, like what are you doing? And going back to that, like I never once, like, yeah, there are times in Bond and Mission Impossible where you're like, this is ridiculous, or how does this person do that, or XYZ. And some of the more death-defying things that these ultimate spies do, that doesn't bother me. But it's some of these nitpicky things where when it takes you out of it, and maybe in a Marvel movie I go, oh yeah, well, Thor can use the Bifrost, or Iron Man's gonna get there no problem, or who gives a shit like how they did something. I'm just here for like popcorn entertainment, world building, character moments, right? Like I don't care about any of that stuff. But in a movie like this, when you're trying to do something that it seems like they're trying to do something more than Marvel, right? Like they're like, ooh, this is a step above that, is like when it comes to like adult storytelling or something like that, right? Like even though the Marvel movies will obviously be way bigger than this thing is, but I think that's when those things stick out even more. And I think just throughout the movie, it's just filled with that. Like you said, the action is just, there's one set piece that stands out for a bad reason. And there's like, and when you see something like Mission Impossible that does the Halo drop so well, and then you have a scene in this movie that is like, it's a mix of like that Uncharted sequence earlier in the year, which weirdly the Uncharted movie looked better doing. It didn't look good either.
Sadly,
but
no
like,
Papa John's in The Gray Man.
No, but like there's a sequence, and it's not a spoiler, but like where an airplane gets taken down, and Sierra 6, the Grayman, needs to get out of that jam, and he's like, the plane's blowing up and he's fighting people inside the plane. He gets ripped out and fighting a guy in the air, and it looks like garbage. It looks so bad. It's shocking. Like it's funny because we had the same thought, because you brought up that exact scene, and I was sitting there, and I think I even turned to you during that scene, and I was like, I like trying to get your attention. I'm just going, Jesus Christ, that looked awful. It looked awful.
It looked 10 times better in a worse movie with The Mummy. Like that sequence where Tom Cruise is literally... Yeah,
without the sound effects was better in that weird trailer.
Yeah, so you're watching scenes like that, and they're pretty mind-numbing because they're never giving you anything to really engage with, and it's going through the motions of what, a spy thriller action movie should be. It's very algorithmic in sort of its casting and its set design, in its construction.
Netflix, baby, loves their algorithm
overall. And like you're watching this thing and you're thinking, okay, like, this is a year where Top Gun Maverick and RRR are being released, and you already mentioned the Marvel movies and James Bond and the Mission Impossible films. They don't have to be as good or on par, the Gray Man specifically here, but at least be entertaining, at least have something that is kind of fun, or have a personality. This movie is lacking any real even style. You mentioned, how good Ryan Gosling is kind of playing that stoic kind of role in Drive. I think that's the reason why that works so well, is because the movie around him is so weird. And then and Ryan Gosling is a great actor, but I think one of his greatest strengths, and when people really tap into it, it shows, is that Ryan Gosling's a weird dude. He's one of those guys where, like, even reading some of like his interviews on this, like him talking about Action Jackson and Looney Tunes Back in Action being some of his favorite action movies, and like that's cooler than anything that's in this movie. And I think a part of what makes him such an interesting actor is that his characters are always a little off kilter, a little bit sort of off center. Like, you look at how well Shane Black kind of tapped into that in The Nice Guys, where,
man. This is our second Nice Guys reference in like 2 reviews.
Because we talked about it with Thor: Love and Thunder as well. But you look at that where it's like, a kind of hard-boiled type character, but is a little bit off the rails, a little bit weirder, a little bit more funny. And with this character, he's always so self-serious, to the point where in that digression where you have like that 2-year kind of like him becoming friends with Julia Butters' character, who, is a child that, lost her parents, her uncle's looking after her, and she also has a pacemaker. And like the whole time you're watching like this conversation between them, kind of getting to know each other in a kind of like, My Bodyguard type kind of way, or Man on Fire kind of thing.
Uncle Court.
Yeah, you kind of feel like, okay, one, he's really uncomfortable in these scenes because he's delivering dialogue that is just literally exposition, character backstory. And the thing I was thinking about the most in that scene, because he's looking for his jacket, I was like, one, he's a guy that doesn't sit down anywhere. 2, he would not take off his jacket for anybody or relax.
Where it was.
3, he would not put it on that chair or sit on that chair. And if I'm thinking about those things while watching that scene, this movie is having problems, because
that's
those
what I mean.
are more interesting.
That's the biggest point. I think that's like the through line of our review, is like there was always something that took us out of it, right? Like we were always thinking of something else other than how cool the action was, and it wasn't. So we're thinking about what we should be thinking about is like, oh, this plot is cool, or the action sequence is cool, or this, or Chris Evans' performance is zany and out there, and
it's gimmicky. It's gimmicky.
That's what I mean. But these are the things they want you to think of. But I'm also always thinking about something else. I'm never thinking about those things because I'm thinking about this little thing or that thing because it's all taking me out of the movie. And I feel like Chris Evans will be that thing that is probably the most memorable, because you have Captain America playing a villain. He's got a mustache. Like it's super easy to say that he's the most memorable thing in the movie. And I think he is having fun playing the villain. But again, even as a villain, like okay, you gave him a mustache. And then you made him just an asshole. And then it's like, oh, okay, Captain America has a mustache and he's an asshole. That's the shtick. And I don't
should
know.
have died twice in the movie. Yeah. Logically speaking, realistically.
Right. There's other things where I turned to you, and that's the moment I turned to you, and I'm like, why didn't they just shoot him?
Yeah.
and like you had him dead to rights and you just leave him alive. And then those are the things where I'm like, you're completely taking me out of the movie, because your characters, it's what I complained about in Halloween Kills as well. Like there's moments where you're like, I get it. Suspension of disbelief. You need a movie to happen, right? Like you can't just kill the villain halfway through because your character had him, but then don't put him in that situation. Like find a more clever way.
And it's not it's not like Court didn't know who Lloyd was, because he did at that point. You've already established that now they know they've seen each other in a previous scene. So it's like, and
that he's a ruthless killer, and that like
exactly. And knowing even Six or Court's own background, it's like, okay, he would take this guy out. Yes. You know, and this isn't spoiling anything either, because actually it is in the promotional material. Like it's a scene where Chris Evans, Lloyd Hansen, and I can't stop laughing at that because one, it's also a very British name, but it also sounds like Chris Hansen from NBC Nightline to Catch a Predator.
Sure. Sure.
But when he gets he gets the tranquilizer in the back of his leg and then falls down on the ground, it's like he's done. He would have been killed. And then there's a later scene where like that's the later scene is probably more of your classic, like, you know, like, oh, action machismo moment, in the same way that it's like, you know, at the end of the first Lethal Weapon movie, you have, you know, Mel Gibson fighting Gary Busey, and then all the cops surrounding him, and Danny Glover being like, don't get involved, don't get involved, I'll take accountability for this, you know, let them fight. Like that kind of moment, right? And that's,
but something like that, when it's so over the top and kind of silly and illogical, but you can kind of buy into it because I feel like maybe the movie earns it. But there's a lot of things in here that it just doesn't. And it, again, the through line, it just takes you out of it, and it ends up being either boring or kind of you nitpicking at different things throughout the movie. It's just very whatever. The one thing I will say, and I thought she was great in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as well. I do think Julia Butters is great as a child actor. Like there's something very, I don't know, you can tell she's acting every time, like, and you can tell that she just practiced the shit out of it, and that's why she's very good at delivering her dialogue. But I do think that kid has a future, because I do think if one thing in this movie, I'm like, oh, she's really good. Like the movie's kind of stupid, and you know, her character having all these things happen to her, a little eye rolly and things like that. But like, I think for someone as young as she is, she's pretty good, and I feel like she'll be around for a long time.
Well, she's in Spielberg's next movie, The Fabelmans, as well. So I think I think this whole cast is a good cast. I mean,
it reminds me of the 355. Remember how many good people were in that movie?
Yeah.
And then it's a generic paint by numbers spy movie.
I think this is maybe a little bit better, just in the sense of like it had more money to work with, but then there's no excuse for how painfully generic this is throughout. And you know, the other thing I am really starting to miss, and it's not just this movie's fault, but I think it's action films in the kind of post-Bourne world, is I miss characters who are action heroes that kind of make it by the seat of their pants, that kind of, you know, survive in a situation but aren't necessarily equipped with every skill that will lend them to kind of basically look at their surroundings and perfectly fight. Like I miss the days of, you know, John McClane, you know, having his feet cut open by glass, and by the end of Die Hard, you know, basically looking like he's gone through the ringer. I miss films as hokey as a movie like Trancers is, with Tim Thomerson playing Jack Death, this kind of hard-boiled detective fighting these kind of weird zombie-like creatures in this one fight scene in a diner where like he literally makes it by the skin of his teeth. Like
I mean, they kind of try to do that with Gosling,
but it's not enough. He's still so calculated and kind of knows the best way out of a situation. I would say the best thing about this movie, and the thing that it kind of really doesn't dwell too much on, which it could have, is I do like the relationship between Fitz and Sierra Six or Court or whatever. We'll just call him Six for this. Is that there is a moment where it's like, okay, there's a turn here and a betrayal, but there's a reason behind the betrayal, and Six is more understanding, and I think Fitz is as well, given the business that they're in. And there's even a moment where that I actually kind of liked where Gosling's character literally says, Fitz knows the business that we're in. He's a big boy. He can handle himself. And then later on, instead of having a moment of like, oh, you betrayed me, or like confrontation, it's like, no, I get
totally
it. Yeah. And I think that they could have,
I would have done the same thing essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that they would have had there in maybe another movie or maybe another draft of this, they would have had maybe another scene where like they confront that more, and it would just eat up more time, but they don't do that. And I kind of appreciated that, but I wish that digression wasn't there. Like it just kind of feels like that completely slows down the movie. Again, like the algorithm thing, you have Chris Evans, who's worked with Ana de Armas in Knives Out, Gosling, who's worked with Ana de Armas in Blade Runner 2049, Wagner Moura, who plays kind of the counterfeit passport guys, worked with her twice in Olivier Assayas's Wasp Network, and Sergio. So like you're looking at all those kind of aspects as well, and you're thinking, okay, well, a lot of those movies that I mentioned are better films, and so you're just thinking, oh, I could be watching those instead, and so none of this movie kind of really culminates in anything more than just a kind of cliche filled traditional spy film that kind of just wastes its resources to the point where when you're watching this thing, you think to yourself, you know what, this could have been a much better movie, or just, again, could have been something that is fun,
at least entertaining.
It's so self-serious. The only thing that kind of verges on humor or camp are those title cards. Like, it makes me want to go to the Russo brothers' house and see if they have like a label maker and like label everything, because it seems like you mentioned it, it's like their one sort of signature as filmmakers stamp, and they're journeyman directors. They're guys that should come in when the house is constructed and keep the maintenance and bills paid. And that's why I think,
and they're good at that.
They're fine at that, but I think that they think they're more than that. And this movie and Cherry kind of proves that they can't go outside of their own jurisdiction.
Yeah, man, I'm with you 1,000%. Are you probably going to watch this? If you've listened to this, you probably either watched it already or you're thinking about watching it. I'd say if you are going to see it, you don't need to see it in a theater, and you could just watch it on Netflix, and you'll probably have the same experience. Like,
it's a lazy Sunday afternoon watch.
Yeah, and is it going to be the worst thing in the world? No. Is it disappointing? Yes. And
is it on par with Red Notice? Yes.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Even though they're very different movies, but it's that kind of, I think at this point, people know what to expect from a Netflix blockbuster. And I both mean that sort of as an insult and sort of not as an insult, because like as they go on, I'm less like surprised, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this seems like a Netflix blockbuster. It's flashy. It's got a lot of big name stars in it. It's got some bad special effects, and it's got, a very paint by numbers kind of, I've seen this movie 1,000 times, but that's what people kind of go to Netflix for. So it's like, okay. And will you enjoy that? I think that will vary from, oh, that was fine, you watched it on a Friday night, to these guys are the Marvel guys who directed Endgame. Like, that wasn't good. So I don't know. I'm going to give it a 2. And that's sort of being generous, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those movies where it's like, Well, you could read a Tom Clancy novel, you could read one of the Lee Child books, or watch the Jack Reacher series on Amazon,
Or
or
just go watch Mission Impossible, or just
yeah, or one of the other movies we referenced already that is more entertaining, that it maybe isn't even perfect. It's just, it's one of those films that is so bland. It's not even a palate cleanser. It's just kind of, it's the tofu of spy thrillers in a lot of ways. You know, there's nothing going on, and the
it's
filmmakers,
sustenance, I guess.
yeah, like it'll feed you, but it won't give you anything to remember. It's a meal,
Yeah.
and that's it. Like there's nothing to write home about. And even for dads, like even if you recommend this to your dad, I feel like,
No, go watch Top Gun. Top Gun's the
yeah,
ultimate dad movie.
and it's a good movie too. Like it
Yeah.
understands how to make a fun experience, and it is both self-serious and self-aware in that perfect balance. Tom Cruise is a madman, but
He
at
gets it.
least, yeah, exactly, he knows how to entertain you. This is just basically so self-indulgent and thinks that it's better than what it is, and what it is just vanilla. And I'm
So
gonna
that's
give
our.
it a 2.
Oh, right. You have to give your rating. So we're on the same page. Quickly, before we wrap up and I plug a few things, the Russo brothers. I'm curious to see where they go from this, because after Cherry and this, movies that look like they're going to be critically panned or mixed, right? Right now, this is at 40 something. The reviews just dropped. It's at 46% on Rotten Tomatoes. Cherry, I think, was at even lower than that. I think this movie will be, I'm curious if it will be seen as a success, because there's no doubt people will watch this on Netflix, right? Like if Adam Sandler movies and Red Notice becomes the biggest movie ever on Netflix and XYZ, yada, yada, yada. This movie will get millions and millions of clicks at least. I don't know how long people will watch it, but people will start this movie. Will that be seen as a success, and will they stay with Netflix because of that, or will it be seen as a failure that they've left the safety blanket of Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios, and then had two critically panned movies in a row? Like, will they go back to that warm blanket and do Secret Wars, or will they continue to try outside of Marvel? Or because I just don't know after this, like
I can tell you where
they
they're
do.
going next. The Academy Awards. They're going to get nominated for producing Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Which I should give them credit for that, because like that's the kind of stuff I want them to use their clout for, right? Like you earn some clout. You started Agbo, is it AGBO? Is that what their
Yeah.
production company is? Use that clout for stuff like that. Like I got to give credit where credit's due. They did produce that movie, and that is, for me right now, the best movie of the year. I know you saw RRR, and both those movies are kind of battling for you. I think you like RRR a bit more. But both supposedly great movies on your side, and one of them I loved, and they produced that, so I got to give them credit. And I do think that it will be nominated for Best Picture. So hey, who am I to say that this movie, Cherry in this movie, will ruin them? Because it won't.
No.
They'll be fine. But I'd just be curious to see what they do, like if they go back to Marvel and continue to produce other stuff, or if they keep trying to do something else. I'm sure this will get a sequel though.
I'm more, well, yeah, because it's a series of books as well.
Like if Extraction gets a sequel,
gotta get more Tyler Rake action,
and
man.
I think Extraction's more interesting, and
it's not a good movie, but at least it has a little bit more personality. And even like Cherry's a worse film than this, but at least Cherry is so obnoxious it has some sort of style to it,
vulgar auteur style.
Sure, whatever. The thing I'm more puzzled about is just, how does Netflix think that they're going to recoup $220 million on a film that's only playing theatrically for a week, then it's going to be available on the streaming service, and with recent cutbacks and marketing problems that they've been having, and stock issues, like it's like, what is their game plan moving forward? Because they seem to still be very much interested in sort of a franchise starter. You know, we're getting a sequel to The Old Guard. They seem to still be very much
Extraction 2 is happening.
wanting to work with not only the Russos, but with people like Ryan Reynolds and Kevin Hart and The Rock, and keeping all those guys in business as well. And it just kind of is like, okay, well, are you really like profiting off of these more than something like Power of the Dog or something smaller, which probably, yeah, it's not going to get as much attention unless it's nominated or up for awards, but I'm sure that, like, you know, it's not hurting you to spend like $2 or $3 million on a small weird movie than spending 220 on one film where you could make 30. I'm thinking of ending things. You, so like, I don't get it.
I don't know. I mean, thinking about it, we know that they're so oversaturated that they started losing subscribers. So I guess their game plan is to try to win some of those people back. But they've kind of gotten everyone, at least in North America. So they're trying global expansion, which is why you see them investing so much in foreign content, foreign to us content, but in specific countries, doing country specific content where they kind of can still gain new subscribers, where here it's retention too, right? So I guess in their mind, they think we got to make sure we keep all these people, right? So if you dangle the carrot of new Russo brothers movie, that means, oh, I'm not going to cancel my $25 subscription per month because there's a Russo brothers movie coming. So maybe they think with the 100 million plus people, I don't even know, they have like a ridiculous amount of subscribers. I think they're so worried about losing people now that they will invest in this gigantic stuff. But the thing is, the quality needs to be there, and they haven't really shown. So it's like the, burn me once kind of thing is like, yeah, people are clicking on these things, but do they really want a sequel? Like, do people, like, just because so many hundred or tens of millions of people watched your movie or started it, I'm like, does that really mean they want Old Guard 2? Does that really mean they want Extraction 2? Like, is that going to be the thing where as a subscriber, I'm going, oh, I watched that Extraction movie 2 years ago, or Old Guard 4 years ago. Oh, well, there's a new one coming. And like, no, I don't think, like, 80% of the people who watch that movie do not give a fuck if Old Guard 2 is coming. Like, I'm like, no, they put Old Guard on because it popped up and it had Charlize Theron in it and big names. And like, that's the same thing with this. And I don't think that group of people are really going, shit, I hope I get Gray Man 2 after watching this. No, at best, they're going to watch it and go, that was okay. What else you got? And then, like, if I don't know, Stranger Things, but now Stranger Things we won't get a new thing of that in a couple years. And
even that's overstayed its welcome for a lot of people now with
totally,
how long each episode has been, and also just time as well, right? Like, I think when something is new and it's exciting and it's fresh, like
I still think it's the biggest thing on the planet, though.
Or House of Cards when Netflix first started, or Orange is the New Black, like, it had that moment in the sun. And again,
Stranger Things still has that.
But the release strategy as well is another thing when it comes to the series side of things, where like they're struggling to figure out, do we stay with the binge approach, or do we kind of spread things out so we can last longer the same way that our competitors are?
I wouldn't be surprised. We talked about that, of being like, if they change their model, it'll be interesting because it could go of two ways. It could be thinking of a retention thing of being like, well, we need to spread this shit out so people don't just subscribe for Stranger Things, watch it in a weekend, cancel the next month, and wait till the next thing, right? Like, that's the model people had for HBO for a while, but HBO, started really strong. Then it was like, oh, I only subscribe for Game of Thrones, or I only subscribe for XYZ, like their one big show. But I feel like they're consistently putting things out. FX is consistently putting things out that like make you want to stick around. So like, it's Apple TV even to an extent, or they just give it to you for free. So it's just like,
or even Amazon's trying now a little bit with Lord of the Rings coming up. They're kind of like,
it's a weekly thing too, right? Like, it's, I don't know, man. Like, it's to spend $200 million on one movie and then hope that you get a return on that investment is really,
especially theatrically, when you only have that 1 week window. And then also
but that's just bonus money, I think, in their minds, right? Like, that they never.
But that's weird because again, like, Netflix needs the money more than Amazon or Apple, who have other avenues, for recouping the costs of things. Where, like, I mean, Disney, I think, is starting to feel that a little bit with their box office with, something like Lightyear. There's been some controversy on certain sides of that film, but I think also people know that, okay, well, it's eventually going to be available on Disney Plus for free. And if I'm a subscriber to Disney Plus, what's the point of taking my 5 children to go out and see this movie and
when I can wait 45 days? Right?
Yeah, because they already set the precedent with the other Pixar movies that they released for free on the site. And even with some of the Marvel movies, like, I'm sure, like, Doctor Strange and Thor could have probably made another like 10-15 million dollars, but there are people that are like, I'll just wait until it's available on Disney Plus. I don't care about spoilers and that.
Then
that's
just the model changing, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, now I think the theatrical experience is going to be seen as bonus money, and you're going to see people, I think these streaming services is where, a lot of the thought will go into moving forward. We see the investment into Marvel shows, right? And, like, I think movies aren't necessarily, like, the theatrical experience isn't going to go away, but I do feel like you're starting to see it become not even an afterthought. It's just like the amuse-bouche to the streaming services, right? Like, if you want it early, or if you want the early access, you can go to the theater. And if you don't, the streaming service. So they're making, I don't know what they're making more money on still. Like, I think eventually they probably will make more money on streaming if they can keep getting the amount of subscribers and keep them hooked and then the people who want that early access will pay, and then it's like bonus money to them if people go see it in theaters, right? But, like, I don't know. I don't know exactly how it all works. We talk out of our ass a lot of the times, but it is fun to talk about. And the streaming stuff, like, we're in such a weird, we have this, I feel like we've been having this conversation for the last 5 years, but, like,
but it keeps changing, right? Like, even the pushback, I think, is kind of interesting, where you had last year where all of Warner Brothers films in the US went to HBO Max, day and date, and they still had theatrical releases. But this year you've had a movie like Elvis do very well and continue to do well, to the point where Baz Luhrmann has had more control and saying, okay, well, this movie isn't going to be available to stream until the fall now because it is making so much money. Or Tom Cruise telling Paramount Plus that Top Gun Maverick is going to be in theaters indefinitely until they feel that they've made enough money, which they keep making money. Like, it's a film that has better legs.
It's a great counterpoint to what I just said, right? Like, I think,
and Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? Like, or
if you do it properly and prove to people that it's worth going to the cinema for, then people will go, right?
Yeah.
If you build it, they will come. Does that make sense? No.
Yes, Kevin Costner. I get it.
All right, guys, that's it. 2 for me, 2 for Eric. A very whatever movie. You'll probably
middle of the road.
Maybe you've already watched it. Let us know on Twitter at Matt Rohrbeck, EM6211, all social medias. I've been changing things up with my exits. Okay. So go follow us on Letterboxd at Untitled_cast. That's where we put all of our reviews and ratings and lists. And I got to update some lists and things like that. Eric has a new MCU ranking. I have a new MCU ranking because Ms. Marvel and Thor Love and Thunder just completed. So you can check out our Thor Love and Thunder review, which also includes a spoiler cast. So you could skip our spoiler-free thoughts and go right into spoilers if you want, or just listen to it as a big, long podcast. That's our most recent review. We also have our newest episode of the Untitled Movie Podcast, 125th episode, where we talk about hot corn, hot Croatia, and have a bunch of hot takes. We talk about my wedding, my trip to Europe, a bunch of other stuff. So go check that out. It was a really fun episode. And that's it. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. I already said this, but you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck. I don't know where I'm going. Go, Eric.
Well, maybe you should mention where you can find all the social medias for Untitled Movie Podcast and Letterboxd specifically, or did you mention that?
I already did that already.
Okay, I zoned out.
The place. Yes, so did I.
Well, I'm mentioning it again.
We're still a little rusty, everyone. We've been off for like a month. Those are the 2 newest podcasts. This is the second review we've done since we got back. So, I'll get back into my clean outros.
Sometimes you got to put a little spice on it.
That's why we're only
a
number
little
8,
bit out
Eric.
of your comfort
That's why
zone.
we're a number 8, because because of
we're,
shit like
we're
this.
wild and unpredictable and fancy free, unlike Mr. Gray. So I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time,
Mr. Gray will see you now.
50 Shades of Grey. I got it.
Yeah.
Hot corn.